What if I told you that a single sentence, spoken by a dying man in 1847, could destroy an entire town for over 150 years? That 3 generations of families would flee in terror, that children would be born cursed before they took their first breath, and that even today, Google Maps shows this place as uninhabitable? You'd probably think I was making it up. But the town of Dudleyville, Alabama exists. Or existed. Because what happened there defies everything we think we know about coincidence, karma, and the power of words. This isn't some campfire ghost story. This is documented history that will make you question whether some curses are actually real. But here's what'll really mess with your head. The man who spoke those final words? He wasn't some witch or warlock. He was just angry. Really, really angry. And sometimes that's all it takes. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll never look at your own words the same way again. Trust me on that. Let me paint you a picture of 1847 Alabama. We're talking dirt roads, wooden sidewalks, and a time when your reputation was literally everything. People knew each other's business, sometimes a little too well. And right in the heart of this biblical times atmosphere sat Dudleyville, population 847, according to the faded census records I dug up. Picture one of those towns where everybody's somebody's cousin, where the general store owner also ran the post office, and where Sunday church wasn't optional. Now, here's where our story gets interesting. The most powerful man in Dudleyville wasn't the mayor or the preacher. It was Edmund Dudley, yeah, the guy they named the town after. This man owned practically everything worth owning. The cotton mill, the largest farm, most of the commercial buildings downtown. You get the picture. But here's the thing about Edmund Dudley that the history books kinda glossed over. He was what my grandmother would have called mean as a snake. And I don't mean just grumpy or strict. I mean the kind of man who'd foreclose on a widow's farm 3 days before Christmas and sleep like a baby that night. The townspeople, they hated him. But they needed him. Classic toxic relationship, right? He provided jobs, bought their crops, kept the town economy running. So they smiled to his face and cursed his name behind closed doors. For 23 years, this dance continued. Edmund getting richer, everyone else getting by, and the tension building like pressure in a tea kettle. Then came October 15, 1847. Edmund Dudley was riding his horse, this massive black stallion he was obsessed with, when something spooked the animal. Maybe a snake, maybe nothing. The horse reared up, Edmund fell backward, and his head hit a sharp rock with a sound that witnesses described as, well, let's just say it wasn't good. Now, you'd think this is where he'd die quietly, right? Maybe apologize for being such a jerk, make peace with God, fade away peacefully? Edmund Dudley had other plans. As blood pooled around his head and half the town gathered in a circle, some genuinely concerned, others just watching, Edmund used his last breath for something that would haunt Dudleyville for the next century and a half. He raised his head just enough to make eye contact with as many faces as possible. His voice came out as a whisper, but in the dead silence, everyone heard every single word. You celebrated my pain. You wished for my death. You smiled while planning to dance on my grave. But I curse this place and every soul in it. Your children will know suffering you never imagined. Your crops will fail when others prosper. Your businesses will crumble to dust. And one by one, this town will die just like you wished I would die. Only slower. Much, much slower. Then his head fell back. Edmund Dudley was dead. The crowd stood there in complete silence for probably 30 seconds. Then someone, nobody remembers who, said what everyone was thinking, good riddance. They buried Edmund 3 days later in a plot outside the town cemetery. Not because he wasn't Christian, but because nobody wanted him resting near their loved ones. Even in death, they didn't trust the man. And for exactly 1 week, life went back to normal. But here's where you need to pay attention, because what happened next, there's no logical explanation for it. None. October 22, 1847, exactly 7 days after Edmund's death, little Sarah Thompson became the first victim. Sarah was 5 years old, healthy as could be, playing in her family's front yard when she suddenly started screaming. Not crying or whining, screaming like she was being torn apart. Her mother ran outside to find Sarah clawing at her own arms, leaving deep scratches, tears streaming down her face. "It burns," she kept saying. "Make it stop burning." But there was nothing on her. No bee stings, no rashes, nothing. The local doctor examined every inch of that little girl and found absolutely nothing wrong. But Sarah kept screaming about the burning for 6 straight hours until her voice gave out. She died that night in her sleep. A perfectly healthy 5-year-old girl, dead for no medical reason whatsoever. The town was shaken, sure, but people die. Even children. This was 1847, death was just more common back then, you know? But then it happened again. 3 days later, Marcus Webb, the man who'd been loudest about his hatred for Edmund, woke up blind. Not gradually losing his sight, not some disease taking his vision slowly. He went to sleep seeing fine and woke up in complete darkness. The doctor said his eyes looked perfectly normal. They just stopped working. Marcus lasted 2 weeks before he walked into the river. On purpose. Now people were starting to whisper. 2 deaths in 10 days, right after Edmund's curse? But surely that was just coincidence, right? Then the crops failed. Not gradually, not due to weather or pests. Every single crop in Dudleyville, cotton, corn, vegetables, everything just died overnight. Literally overnight. Farmers went to sleep looking at healthy plants and woke up to black, withered fields that looked like they'd been hit by fire. But here's the really weird part. Farms just outside Dudleyville's borders? Their crops were fine. Perfectly fine. The line between healthy plants and dead ones followed the town limits exactly. By November, 3 more children had died of mysterious illnesses. The general store burned down for no apparent reason, no lightning, no accident, just fire. And Thomas Henley, the man who'd organized Edmund's funeral, developed what the doctor called a wasting sickness. Basically, he was dying from the inside out, getting thinner and weaker every day despite eating normally. People were scared. Really scared. Some folks started packing up to leave. But here's where it gets even stranger. Those who tried to move away couldn't. Not wouldn't or didn't want to. Literally couldn't. The Henderson family loaded up their wagon, said goodbye to their neighbors, and started down the road toward Birmingham. 3 miles outside town, their horses just stopped. Wouldn't move another step, no matter how much they whipped or encouraged them. It was like they'd hit an invisible wall. Other families reported similar experiences. Horses stopping, wagon wheels breaking at the exact same spot, sudden illnesses that cleared up the moment they turned back toward town. It was like some invisible barrier was keeping everyone trapped inside Dudleyville's borders. By December of 1847, the population had dropped from 847 to 312. Not because people left, because they died. In less than 3 months, more than half the town was gone. And every single death was connected to someone who'd been there when Edmund Dudley cursed the town. Now, if this was just a story about adults who were present for Edmund's curse getting their comeuppance, that would be one thing. Twisted justice, maybe. Karma with a capital K. But that's not what happened in Dudleyville. See, Edmund's curse had a clause that nobody understood until it was too late. Remember his exact words? Your children will know suffering you never imagined. Not just the children who were alive in 1847. All the children. Every single child born in Dudleyville after October 15, 1847 came into the world wrong. Let me tell you about the first cursed baby. Mary Catherine Stillwell was born on February 3, 1848, almost 4 months after Edmund's death. Her parents, Joseph and Ruth, had survived the initial wave of deaths and were desperately trying to rebuild their lives. They thought maybe things were getting better. Mary Catherine was born at exactly 3:17 in the morning. The midwife later said it was the most normal delivery she'd ever attended. No complications, healthy baby girl, perfect in every way you could see. But when that baby opened her eyes for the first time, they were completely black. Not brown, not dark blue like some newborns have, but like looking into a deep well at midnight. And Mary Catherine never cried. Not when she was born, not when she was hungry, not when she was hurt. She just stared. With those impossible black eyes, tracking movement around the room like she was studying everyone, figuring them out. The really disturbing part? Mary Catherine never slept. Her parents would put her in her crib, and she'd lie there all night with those black eyes wide open, just watching. Waiting. By the time she was 6 months old, Mary Catherine had never made a sound. Not a cry, not a coo, not even a whimper. But here's what'll give you nightmares: she understood everything. You could see the intelligence in those eyes, calculating and cold. Ruth Stillwell started losing her mind. She'd wake up in the middle of the night to find Mary Catherine standing in her crib, and babies aren't supposed to be able to stand at 6 months old. Just standing there, staring at her parents with those black eyes. One night, Ruth swore she heard Mary Catherine whisper something. She couldn't make out the words, but the voice, she said it sounded like an old man. Like Edmund Dudley. Ruth died 3 weeks later. They found her in the barn, hanging from a rope. Her suicide note was just 4 words: "She's not my baby." But Mary Catherine wasn't the only one. Every single child born in Dudleyville after the curse showed similar abnormalities. The Williams twins were born joined at the forehead, not physically, but they shared thoughts. If one twin was hurt, the other would scream. If one was hungry, both would refuse to eat until they were fed at exactly the same time. Little Robert Chase was born with his eyes sealed shut. Not a birth defect. The skin had grown over them completely. But somehow, he could see everything. He'd point to things, reach for objects, react to people entering the room. When the doctor finally managed to cut the skin away from his eyes, there was nothing underneath. Just empty sockets. And yet Robert could still see. Then there was Emma Hartford, born with a full mouth of adult teeth. Sharp, pointed teeth that she used to bite anyone who came near her. Her own mother had scars up and down her arms from trying to nurse the baby. Emma never grew bigger than a 6-month-old, but she lived for 14 years with the mind of an adult, speaking in complete sentences from the day she was born. But here's what really messed with people's heads. These children all knew things they couldn't possibly know. They describe events that happened before they were born, tell adults about conversations that took place in private, predict deaths days before they occurred. And every single one of them claimed to remember Edmund Dudley. Not like they'd heard stories about him, like they'd actually met him, talked with him, learned from him. By 1850, there were 17 cursed children in Dudleyville. 17 impossible, terrifying little beings that looked human but definitely weren't quite right. The remaining adults were losing their minds trying to care for children who seemed more like enemies than family. Some parents started making terrible choices. The Morrison family took their twin boys born with their eyes rolled permanently back in their heads, showing only white, out into the woods one winter night and never came back. When a search party found them 3 days later, the parents were frozen solid, but the twins were alive, sitting calmly in the snow, playing with icicles and humming a song nobody recognized. Other families just gave up. They'd leave their cursed children on doorsteps, in the church, anywhere someone else might take responsibility. But nobody wanted these kids. How could they? And the children seemed to understand exactly what was happening. They didn't cry when they were abandoned. They just watched with those knowing eyes, like they'd expected this all along. By 1852, something even stranger started happening. The cursed children began organizing. They'd slip out of their houses at night and meet in the woods outside town. Nobody knew what they did out there, but people reported strange lights, unnatural sounds, and smells like sulfur and rotting meat coming from the forest. During the day, these children would barely speak to adults. But at night they were busy. Samuel Morrison, one of the twins who'd survived that winter night with his frozen parents, was caught sneaking back into town at dawn. When the constable questioned him, 8-year-old Samuel looked him dead in the eye and said, "Uncle Edmund says it's almost time for phase 2. Uncle Edmund. That's what all the cursed children called him. The man who'd died before any of them were born. The constable asked Samuel what phase 2 meant. Samuel smiled, and remember, this is an 8-year-old boy with eyes that showed only white, and whispered, "The grown-ups turn to be children." 3 days later, every adult in Dudleyville woke up different. Joseph Henley, a 45-year-old blacksmith, spent the entire day sitting in his workshop, crying and asking for his mother. Martha Webb, a 38-year-old schoolteacher, threw a tantrum in the middle of Main Street because someone took her doll, a doll that didn't belong to anyone. The adults were aging backward mentally. Not physically, they still looked like grown-ups. But their minds were becoming those of children. Scared, confused children who didn't understand what was happening to them. And the cursed children? They watched it all with satisfaction, like they'd been waiting for this moment their entire short lives. But that's not even the worst part of what Edmund's curse did to Dudleyville. October 15, 1852. Exactly 5 years after Edmund Dudley's death. By this point, Dudleyville was barely hanging on. The population had dropped to 89 people, 34 mentally regressed adults, and 55 cursed children who seemed to be running the show behind the scenes. But Edmund wasn't done. Not even close. That morning, something unprecedented happened. Every single person who died in Dudleyville since the curse began came back. Not as zombies shuffling around looking for brains. Nothing that simple. They returned as they were, fully conscious, fully aware, but with one major difference. They remembered everything about being dead. And they were angry about it. Little Sarah Thompson, the first victim who died screaming about burning, walked through her family's front door at exactly sunrise. She looked exactly the same as the day she died, 5 years old, blonde pigtails, that little blue dress her mother had buried her in. Her mother, whose mind had regressed to that of a child, saw Sarah and started crying with joy. "Sarah, you came back. I missed you so much." But Sarah wasn't the same little girl who died. She looked at her mother with cold, calculating eyes and said in a voice that sounded ancient, "Mama, do you want to know what it feels like to burn forever?" Then she touched her mother's arm. The screaming started immediately. Martha Thompson's arm began to smoke, then blacken, then crumble to ash, but she couldn't pull away. Sarah held on tight, that innocent 5-year-old face showing no emotion as her mother's entire arm burned away to nothing. Martha died from shock. But here's the thing, she died laughing. Hysterically, uncontrollably laughing as her arm disintegrated. Like some part of her broken mind found the whole situation hilarious. That same morning, Marcus Webb, the man who'd gone blind and walked into the river, returned to his house dripping wet, his eye sockets still empty and black. He found his wife, whose mind was now that of a 10-year-old, playing with cornhusk dolls in the kitchen. "Helen," Marcus said, water pooling around his feet, "would you like to see what I saw in the darkness?" Before Helen could answer, Marcus reached out and touched her face. Her eyes immediately went solid black. Not rolled back, not damaged, just black. And Helen started describing things she was seeing. Horrible things. "There are so many people down there, Marcus. So many people screaming in the dark. And they're all looking up at us, wanting to trade places. They're so jealous that we get to have skin and breath and heartbeats." Helen died that afternoon, but she never stopped talking about what she was seeing in that darkness. Right up until her heart stopped, she was describing the faces of the damned reaching up toward the living world. One by one, all the returned dead visited their surviving family members. And one by one, they shared their gifts, showing the living what death was really like in Edmund Dudley's version of the afterlife. But here's what made everything exponentially worse. The cursed children welcomed the dead like old friends. They'd been communicating with them all along, apparently. Those midnight meetings in the forest? They weren't just plotting among themselves. They were taking instructions from Uncle Edmund and all his growing army of the dead. By noon on October 15, 1852, every living adult in Dudleyville was dead. But they didn't stay dead long. See, Edmund had figured out something interesting during his 5 years of being deceased. Death wasn't an ending, it was just a change of address. And if you were angry enough, determined enough, you could set up a pretty comfortable afterlife situation. Especially if you had help. The cursed children had been that help. For 5 years, they'd been feeding him energy, life force, whatever you want to call it. Every night in those forest meetings, they'd been making Edmund stronger in death than he'd ever been in life. And now he was ready for the grand finale. That evening, as the sun set on October 15, 1852, Edmund Dudley himself returned to Dudleyville. But he didn't come back as the middle-aged man who died 5 years earlier. Edmund returned as something else entirely. The witnesses, and yes, there were witnesses because people from surrounding towns had come to investigate why nobody had been seen leaving Dudleyville for weeks, described a figure that was part man, part shadow, part something that hurt to look at directly. Edmund was tall, much taller than he'd been in life. His face was recognizable but wrong, like someone had carved it out of black marble and forgotten to add warmth or humanity. His eyes glowed with what one witness described as the light of dying stars. But the worst part? Edmund was laughing, not cackling like a maniac, but laughing with genuine joy, like he was having the best time of his life. Or death. He walked down Main Street, floated, actually, about 2 inches off the ground, toward the town square. Behind him followed every person who'd ever died in Dudleyville since the curse began. Men, women, children, all looking perfectly normal except for their eyes, which reflected that same dying starlight as Edmund's. The cursed children formed a circle around Edmund in the town square. And then came the real show. Edmund raised his arms, and his voice carried for miles. People in Birmingham claimed they heard every word clearly despite being 30 miles away. Citizens of Alabama, witness what becomes of those who mock the dying words of Edmund Dudley. This town rejected me in life, celebrated my death, and wished suffering upon my name. I have given them exactly what they wanted, suffering beyond their wildest imagination. But I am not finished. This is merely the beginning. Every town, every city, every place that harbors cruelty, greed, and hatred toward their fellow man will know my justice. The dead remember everything, and we have so much work to do. Then Edmund smiled, and witnesses said that smile was worse than any scream they'd ever heard. However, I'm not unreasonable. I offer a choice to all who witness this day. Spread word of what you have seen. Tell everyone that Edmund Dudley keeps his promises. Those who heed the warning and choose kindness over cruelty, generosity over greed, will have nothing to fear from me. But those who continue in wickedness, well, we'll be visiting them soon. Edmund gestured to the cursed children and the army of the dead. My family has grown so beautifully, and we're always looking for new members. As if on cue, every building in Dudleyville burst into flames. Not regular fire, this burned cold and blue, consuming wood and stone equally without creating any smoke. In less than 10 minutes, the entire town was reduced to ash. But Edmund and his followers didn't disappear. They just faded, like they'd become part of the landscape itself. The witnesses fled, of course. They spread Edmund's story throughout Alabama, then across the South, then the entire country. Newspapers picked it up, government officials investigated, and everyone agreed on one thing. Nobody was ever going to live in Dudleyville again. The federal government quietly bought the land and declared it unsuitable for habitation due to soil contamination. They posted guards, built fences, and made sure nobody could get close enough to see what was really there. Because here's the thing about Edmund's revenge, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Which brings us to what I'll tell you about the modern-day encounters with Edmund Dudley and why the government is still keeping this place locked down in 2024. Alright, so you're probably thinking, cool story, but this all happened 150 years ago. Ancient history, right? Edmund Dudley is still out there. And his family of the cursed and the dead? They've been busy. Let me tell you what happened to James Morrison in 1987. James was a paranormal investigator, one of those guys with too much equipment and not enough common sense who made a living exploring haunted places for TV shows. He'd heard rumors about Dudleyville through government contacts and decided to be the first person to document what was really left there. Big mistake. James bypassed the federal barriers using some shady connections and hiked into what used to be Dudleyville on October 13, 1987. He brought cameras, audio equipment, electromagnetic field detectors, the whole ghost hunting arsenal. For the first 2 days, his radio reports to his team were normal. Lots of ash residue, some foundation stones, definitely picking up unusual electromagnetic readings, but nothing dramatic. Day 3, his radio went quiet. Day 5, his backup team came looking for him. They found James Morrison sitting in what used to be the town square, perfectly calm, having a conversation with empty air. When they approached him, James turned around with the biggest smile they'd ever seen on his face. "Guys, you have to meet Uncle Edmund. He's been telling me the most amazing stories about justice and revenge and how the world really works." James's eyes had changed. They weren't the solid black of the original Cursed Children, but they had this weird reflective quality, like looking at stars in a dark pond. And when he spoke about Edmund, his voice carried this undertone, like two people talking at the same time. The backup team tried to get James to leave with them. He refused, said he had important work to do, and that Edmund was teaching him how to make things right in the world. They had to physically drag James Morrison out of Dudleyville. The entire time, he was screaming not in pain, but in rage. Screaming at them for interrupting his education and promising they'd be sorry for taking him away from his new family. James Morrison spent the next 6 months in a psychiatric facility. The doctors said he was experiencing elaborate delusions about historical figures and had developed severe antisocial tendencies. But here's what the medical reports didn't mention. During those 6 months, 17 people in James's hometown of Decatur, Alabama died under mysterious circumstances. People who'd been cruel to others, who'd cheated or stolen or caused suffering. They all died the same way the original Dudleyville victims had died, inexplicably, painfully, and with expressions of absolute terror on their faces. The deaths stopped the day James Morrison killed himself in his hospital room. His suicide note was just one sentence: "Uncle Edmund says I've graduated." But James wasn't the only modern encounter with Edmund Dudley. In 1993, a military training exercise went wrong when a helicopter pilot got disoriented and crash-landed near Dudleyville. The pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Chin, survived the crash with minor injuries. She was found 3 days later, walking along a highway 20 miles away. Sarah's report to her superiors was interesting. She claimed that after the crash, she'd been helped by a very tall gentleman in old-fashioned clothes who'd given her food and water and shown her the way to safety. She described this man as charming, intelligent, and deeply concerned about the state of the world. "He showed me around his property," Sarah reported. "It's this beautiful place with the most incredible gardens and architecture. Very peaceful. He told me he was working on some kind of project to make society more fair, more just. Really inspiring guy." The problem? Sarah Chen had been found walking away from Dudleyville, and satellite imagery showed nothing but empty, barren land for miles in every direction. No buildings, no gardens, no sign of human habitation. When investigators pressed Sarah for more details, she became agitated, said they were calling her a liar, that Uncle Edmund had warned her people might not understand his work. She insisted on drawing a map showing the location of this beautiful property where she'd been helped. The map perfectly matched the original layout of Dudleyville from 1847. Sarah Chen was quietly transferred to a desk job and agreed to never discuss her experience publicly. But word leaked out that she'd started advocating for more aggressive justice systems and had begun researching ways to make people accountable for their cruelty. She disappeared in 1995. Her car was found abandoned on a highway 3 miles from Dudleyville. She left behind detailed journals describing her ongoing conversations with Edmund and plans to help him expand his work to other locations. Sarah Chin was never found. But the really disturbing part? She wasn't the last one. Since 1975, the government has documented 43 separate incidents involving people who've somehow encountered Edmund Dudley or his family. Hikers who got lost and were helped by friendly locals in an area that's been uninhabited for 150 years. Researchers who reported finding thriving communities where satellite imagery showed only empty land. Military personnel who claimed to have received hospitality from charming Southern gentlemen who spoke with outdated accents and had very strong opinions about justice and punishment. In every single case, the people who encountered Edmund came back changed. More concerned with punishing wickedness, less tolerant of cruelty or dishonesty, and absolutely convinced that society needed more aggressive correction of bad behavior. And in every single case, mysterious deaths started happening in their home communities shortly afterward. The government's current theory? Edmund Dudley didn't just curse one town. He created a kind of recruitment program. He's been building an army of the living and the dead for over 150 years, turning anyone who encounters him into agents of his particular brand of justice. But here's what really should keep you awake at night. In 2019, a geological survey team was doing routine soil testing near Dudleyville when their equipment detected something impossible. The ground temperature in a perfect circle around the original town site was exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit human body temperature, despite the fact that it was January and the surrounding ground was frozen solid. More disturbing? Seismic equipment picked up rhythmic vibrations from underground. Vibrations that matched human heartbeats. Hundreds of them, all beating in perfect synchronization. The survey was immediately classified, and a new perimeter was established around Dudleyville with much more sophisticated security than before. Because apparently, Edmund's family has been growing. Underground. Now, I could tell you about the satellite images that occasionally show buildings and people in Dudleyville that aren't there when you look with the naked eye. Or the radio transmissions that sometimes pick up conversations in that area, conversations between voices that sound like they're from different time periods, all discussing expansion plans and recruitment targets. I could mention the fact that every few years, people in towns across America report encounters with charming strangers who seem very interested in local gossip about who's mean to whom, who cheats on their taxes, who mistreats their family members. Strangers who always seem to know more about people's private business than they should. Or I could tell you about the recent uptick in mysterious deaths among people who've gained reputations for cruelty or dishonesty, deaths that mirror exactly what happened in Dudleyville back in 1847. But instead, let me leave you with this. 3 weeks ago, I received a message on my website from someone claiming to be a representative of the Dudleyville Historical Preservation Society. The message was polite, complimentary about my research, and included an invitation to visit their fully restored historical site to see the real story of what happened there. The message was sent from an email address that traced back to servers that don't exist, from a location that's been uninhabited for 175 years. I haven't responded to the message. But I'll be honest with you, I'm curious. And that curiosity scares me more than any ghost story I've ever investigated. Because what if Edmund Dudley was right? What if the world really would be a better place with more aggressive justice for people who cause suffering? What if his methods, however extreme, actually work? These are dangerous thoughts. The kind of thoughts that apparently get you recruited into Edmund's ever-growing family. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. If someone offered you the power to punish everyone who'd ever been cruel to you, everyone who'd ever cheated or lied or caused pain to innocent people, would you take it? Even if the price was joining an army of the dead led by a man who turned an entire town into his personal vision of justice? Because based on everything I've researched, that's exactly the choice Edmund Dudley offers to everyone he meets. And judging by how his family keeps growing, a lot of people are saying yes. The town cursed by a dying man's last words isn't just history. It's recruitment. It's an ongoing job interview for people who think the world needs more aggressive correction of bad behavior. And the scariest part? Sometimes, late at night, when I think about all the cruelty and injustice I see in the world, Edmund Dudley's offer doesn't sound so bad. Maybe that's why I got that invitation. Maybe that's why I'm telling you this story. Or maybe I'm already part of his family, and I just don't know it yet. After all, the best way to recruit new members is to tell them a story that makes Edmund's methods seem reasonable, justified, even necessary. A story exactly like the one I just told you. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, be kind to each other. You never know who might be watching, or what they might do if you're not. If you made it this far, you're probably wondering whether any of this is true. Whether Dudleyville actually exists, whether Edmund Dudley was a real person, whether there's really a government cover-up protecting an army of the vengeful dead. Here's what I'll tell you: do your own research. Look up the records. Try to visit the coordinates. See what you find. But if you do find something, if you get an invitation to meet some charming historical preservationists, Remember this story and ask yourself, are you the kind of person Edmund Dudley would want to recruit? Because if you are, he might already be watching.